working class rising up. This is the ruling class punching down.
My day bigger your day.
First rule of gladiator school, bro. Don't punch down.
Charging into a goblin nest.
Hail Trump!
The threat from outside forces is far less sinister, dangerous, and grave than the threat from within.
Control your own body.
We will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
We can fight the entire grinding system. Nobody can. But together, everybody can.
I did nothing wrong.
Hello and welcome to Did Nothing Wrong Live, the show that cuts through the noise and helps you make sense of the chaotic information space around us. I'm Griff, and with me are Karl and Jay McKenzie. In today's episode, we talk about whether Trump's abuse of Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky was simply a pretext to set up a visit from Vladimir Putin. We congratulate Stephen Miller on his new babysitting job, and we talk about the increasingly large protests at town halls and Tesla dealerships around the country. Keep listening to learn more, and remember, smash those like and subscribe buttons like Tesla's stock hitting an absolute new floor for the year. Guys, man, that meeting yesterday between Trump and Zelensky was just something else. I've never seen anything quite like that.
No, that was bad. That was kind of worst case scenario territory, and now we're seeing not just the effects of that, but we're seeing the whole picture, I think, a little bit clearer today. And yeah, that was a debasement of both the office and the country, right, by the president and the vice president. And it also showed who the true leader of what I think we could call the free world looks like right now. And it's a comedian who's been fighting a war for 3 years and has proven himself to be one of the more powerful statesmen of the last 60 years. And
yeah, it's like he's got this new acting job and he's playing Churchill. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. And what's interesting is I don't think he's acting.
No.
I think this is who he is. And, I know a number of people in Ukraine and have been real tied in with some of that for a long time. And, it's very much someone from what we know here and from what I've heard from them, this is someone who very much didn't want to be a leader necessarily in a wartime, but also understood that, like, sometimes you have to rise to the occasion. And what we saw yesterday was someone rising to the occasion again while two people shrank.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. When Zelensky was first elected, he was kind of a protest vote for a lot of Ukrainians who were just sick of the status quo and the corruption and politicians who just weren't changing things. And while they were very much against Russia and the invasion in the Donbass region had already happened and was ongoing, Ukrainians were they wanted a change, and so they elected this comedian. And yeah, I think everyone had their doubts about how serious he was and what he was really going to be about. But yeah, he has surprised us. He has risen to the occasion. And in his horrible, evil, debauched way, so has J.D. Vance, because he
absolutely
look, they didn't have to do this way. They could. We are all for helping Ukraine, funding Ukraine, keep the war going. Russia is the aggressor. They invaded. They chose to invade. All of those things are true. Yes. The Trump administration, we knew this was going to happen. We talked about this 3 years ago, Griff, on this podcast.
Yeah, we've been talking about this.
Yeah, they were always going to cut aid, and they were going to push the Republican Party, which had been on board with funding Ukraine, but it increasingly just that support went down and down, and they were eventually going to stop it. But it is one thing to stop the aid and say, okay, America first, we don't want to give you any more money, which is bad. It's bad enough. But they went so much further and decided we are with Putin now. And J.D. Vance was in that room because he and whoever agrees with him and supports his vision uh, of the international order, thought Trump is weak enough and malleable enough that he might waffle. He might not. Zelensky might charm him. Zelensky might convince him to maybe go a little easier than he should. J.D. Vance was there to torpedo this thing, to ensure that it went to shit and that Zelensky left without signing anything, agreeing to anything. I don't know how many people knew that was the plan, but it was clearly the plan, and it clearly happened because of J.D. Vance, and it is despicable.
Well, and I think it shows too that like this coalition of fascists that we now have in office are smarter than they were in 16, in that they know how to keep Trump from straying too close to things that might not look like their agenda, right? And Vance is not America first. Vance is fascism now and forever for my friends who have the money and who backed me. Don't fuck with them. That's his world. And Trump, as much as he is a fascist and a horrifying person, is incredibly malleable, especially for a guy like Zelensky, who could walk in and schmooze the hell out of him. And say, look, Donald, you'll be a hero to my people. You'll be a hero to Europe. You're going to be this great leader with me. That's how Zelensky would have gotten him, and probably kind of already had. It's, it definitely looked like there was some kind of, did I say that? Oh, I don't remember saying that after that first interview. And, Vance and the techno-fascist, actual hard fascist side can't have that, because this is crucial to the game of multipolarity that they believe in just as much as Dugin or any of the Russian fascists who have been pushing it for years. And their version of multipolarity can't have a world where there are alliances between democratic countries or those fighting against them, because that automatically makes the world not multipolar. And when we say multipolar in this context, what they're actually saying is we want to go back to colonialism of the most brutal form, take land that we want, and we will imperially take over whatever we can, and we're going to carve the world into 3 or 4 sections that we own. The United States under Trump and their fascist regime, Russia and their fascist regime, and then whoever gets the rest of it, whether that's Asia and China's expansion, whether that's some other form of an authoritarian movement that rolls in. The goal is not to bring alliances. It's to break them and recast the world in their image.
Exactly.
And that is Vance versus Trump. Trump's America first, right? Like, Trump's just a dumb white supremacist and a fascist who wants whatever he thinks. Vance and these guys are the real deal.
Right.
Well, and if you watch that meeting at the White House again and watch it all happen, Trump just sounds like every Fox News talking point, which we know he's still spending all day watching Fox News and repeating all the things they've said about Ukraine and why Putin's not so bad and all of this. Vance is not repeating anything. Vance is not reading from some kind of script that's out there in the podcast ether. This is his own thing. This is his own idea, and it was a choice. I mean, he didn't even have to be there. It would have been more normal for him to not even be in the room.
He's the vice
much
president.
less taking center stage.
Doesn't he have a funeral to go to or something like that?
Would Mike Pence have been there?
No.
If he was, he certainly wouldn't have said anything.
No.
Yeah.
And I think it's also interesting to point out that 7 days ago, Reuters had a story on Zelensky's initial reluctance to sign the deal that was being presented to him at the time. And one of the big sticks that apparently he was threatened with was the cutoff of Elon Musk's Starlink service to Ukraine. And considering the state of Ukraine's infrastructure these days, after Russia's been bombing it in their war of choice for the last 3 years, they run on Starlink to a large extent. They run on satellite telephony, satellite communications. And if Musk really decides to cut that off, then yeah, they got a problem, because there really isn't anything else like that. So you can see Musk kind of putting his finger on the scale and saying, no, we want you to make this deal.
Yeah.
And we're going to threaten you in private with cutting off this vital service that you need. We're going to threaten you in public with having JD Vance essentially try to bait you into saying something that you'll regret later. And then when you don't, we'll just have Trump, berate you the entire time.
Yeah.
It's very clear these people are out there, pushing for the outcome that they want.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's multipolarity.
Yeah, it's multipolarity, and this is also the way that multipolarity works on the institutional level, right? Like, you don't have a unified message. You have no real goal beyond power. And so the power goal trumps all others, and it looks a lot like a mafia.
Right.
You see Trump out here pointing at Zelensky using the old pussy galore two fingers and just being like, look, that's there's only one in America. We know that as one thing, right?
Mhm.
That is my way or the highway. And from a guy wearing a suit, who might have a little bit of sway in a certain part of the city or something, right? And so, like, it's
Right.
really clear, like, we have a multi-faction fascist movement now trying to figure out which way is going to increase their power with
Right.
the least amount of work, right? And if it's going to look like fights in the Oval Office and threats, and coupling that then with external threats that they're relying on from providers, well, welcome to hybrid authoritarianism, right? Like, this is the model where corporate power that has monopoly over a certain thing you need can back the state, and the state can back them, and then the state can also say, look, if you don't do what we say, we'll come for you. It's why Musk's trying to put the FAA on Starlink. It's the same thing. It's a mechanism to capture, not a mechanism to give you more access to talking or the internet, right? Like, ultimately, Starlink is a way to do planetary capture of key systems for countries all over, as well as key institutions of democracies in other countries, where he can make now the decision to not, if you don't abide his goal.
Yeah. That silly bit about, having to be a natural born citizen to be president. That's not going to stop him.
Nope.
That's not going to stop a guy like Peter Thiel.
No.
They'll just buy themselves a front man and do it the way they've done it in other authoritarian societies around the world.
Yep. Yeah. And now they have the tech infrastructure to actually do the power move, which is say, look, you're dependent on us. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
It's the Russian oil and gas method, but for technology, right? We own the pipeline. You need it. That sucks.
Yep. What are you going to do about it?
What are you going to do about it? You can't fly drones without our technology to attack us.
Yeah. And if you can't fly your drones, the Russians are going to wipe you out.
Yep. Yeah. And
You've
I
got
mean,
two choices and none of them are good.
no. And the reality is that meeting restructured most of the West's, let's say, kind of policy, right? We're starting to see, stuff like rumors floating that some of the northern countries have now said they're not going to allow American warships to fuel there. There's stuff starting to happen, right? Like, America is retreating in full from the world, and it's a forced retreat because the goal isn't to run the world, it's to own it.
Yeah, definitely. And, speaking of Elon and owning it, we're seeing an interesting connection that got made this week with who exactly might be walking Elon through some of how the levers of power in Washington work.
Yes.
Stephen Miller
Yep.
has been the guy that has popped up on the radar as being, I guess, what you would call Elon's Sherpa when it comes to Washington, being able to walk him through where the agencies are, where the cuts can be made. Because, a guy like Elon isn't going to understand any of this by himself. He isn't going to understand any of this without years in government to, get familiar with how all this works. Whereas a guy like Miller does. So Miller and his wife, Katie Miller,
Yep.
they are she was Pence's press secretary at one point, Pence's chief of staff. They're both Washington insiders. They know exactly how all of this stuff works. And they have been able to essentially point Elon in the right direction. They were even in the article referring to him as sort of a prime minister, which is just kind of disgusting to say, really.
Yeah.
Like, doesn't roll well off the tongue. It kind of makes me want to go throw up, but
Sounds like a vice
here we
lord to
are.
me.
Wow.
Well, yeah, but it makes sense for them to be saying prime minister when they consider Trump a king.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
Yeah.
That's really where the term, I'm sure, is originated in some of their minds, and
Yeah,
it
if we
makes
don't have a
sense
president
'cause,
anymore.
we say no kings, and they say, well, no, actually this one.
Yeah. No, and it's a thing, right? Like, and we're starting to see real delineations and ties, right? And the Stephen Miller, Elon Musk tie is a pretty clear indicator that, like, the new right is consolidating, right? And, like, you've got the tech side, which is Musk and Thiel and Andreessen and Yarvin and this whole thing. And then you have the American First new right, Miller, the fascists, the white-powered nerds, and the Dungeons and Dragons Nazis are starting to come together, right? And, like, it's the explicit merger, and one that, like, I've done a fair amount of writing on in the past that I was concerned about because we were starting to see it. And now, this is a pretty clear indicator that America First and the network state are going to start to become one. And we're seeing that, right? Like, some of the messaging coming out of the techno-fascists are starting to talk about things like greater Idaho, the Cascadia stuff. Like, they're starting to get in on the Christian identity, white power, city-state idea, because it merges really well with their idea of the network state and the idea of things like Thiel's praxis, right? Where we're just going to wholesale build a city-state that's run as a technologically advanced business and deal. So it's like they're disparate things starting to come together that are really dark.
And it's interesting that you brought up Christian identity. I had that same thought this last week when I realized that, like, the new plan that guys like Andreessen are talking up is very, very similar to what the Aryan nations used to call the Northwest Territorial Imperative.
Yep, exactly.
That, Pastor Bob Miles, quote unquote, pastor of the Christian Identity Church in Michigan, was primarily responsible for coming up with, but it's been promoted by guys like Richard Butler from the Aryan Nations and Harold Covington from what he called the Northwest Front. It was like 6 guys in Bremerton, but whatever. They have all promoted this stuff over the years, and somehow the tech bros have just conveniently found their way into some very Christian identity, white power sort of territory.
Right.
It's really weird to see how this has just been a thing. Like, all of these ideas are just recycled 1980s, 1990s white supremacist stuff.
Yeah.
So if you think we're being unfair in saying that they're advocating for white nationalism, well, maybe, but we know where they got it.
Right.
Or at least we know where they seem to have gotten it.
Yeah. Well,
if they've got an alternate source, it would be great if they would provide it.
The thing with Stephen Miller that's so important here is that, look, we know this from reporting from SPLC back when they used to do that, and the old days when the money you gave them actually went to uncovering things. But we know that Stephen Miller was reading VDARE and the white nationalist anti-immigrant sites, who now are honestly not even that comparatively extreme, but 10 years ago was the very fringe of the far right, the racist, hard right. And Stephen Miller was in the middle of that. And he was one of the few from Trump's first term who actually survived the various purges of people that Trump liked and didn't like and got rid of, and some of them were brought back. And the constant churn of his administration, the one guy who actually made it through was Stephen Miller. And the fact that he is this close with Musk, that he and his wife are smoothing Musk integration and into the destroying the federal government. I don't want to say into the federal government, because he's working to destroy it. But the fact that they're the go-between between Trump and Musk, I don't know. It says some very bad things about where we are
Yes.
and where this is going. I mean, my question, and I know we don't necessarily agree on this, is what's going to happen when the numbers really go down? Because they're driving us next month, the tariffs that Trump has been threatening and not taking away, and maybe it's going to happen, maybe it's not. Well, he says again that they're going to happen next month, and the economic numbers are not good. And you've got the Republican, the bill that they just passed that's going to do trillions of dollars of tax cuts. I mean, they're driving the economy off a cliff, and it's going to hurt, and it's going to hit people hard, and it's going to make people who aren't really paying attention suddenly start to pay attention. I think the numbers are going to get bad enough, and it's going to happen soon, and sooner than they can consolidate all the power they need to consolidate.
Yeah.
So there are fault lines here. There are questions about which side is Miller going to really be on. It's the Bannon and Musk, will they, won't they feud. I mean, all of that, it's going to come to a head. And I think there's a possibility. I still think there's a possibility that they try to get rid of Elon. I mean, if you read that Wired article, which talked about Stephen and Katie Miller's role, it kind of talked about Elon like he was a child that they had they had to kind of guide him along, not just because he doesn't understand the government, but because if you've seen the stuff he's posting on Twitter every day, you know that something is not right in that man's head. And while he wants to, he wants to carry around the chainsaw and pretend like, oh, he's the genius in control and he's just slashing all of this waste, it's unclear. Like, if you watch the guy talk at CPAC, how many, I don't know how many drugs he's on, but kind of wonder if it's a lot.
Is this what ketamine abuse over the years does to you? I've never done ketamine, so I don't really know, but man, that's a head full of ketamine.
I have a bunch of friends who do a fair amount of ketamine, and
seems to be a hell of a drug.
This does not seem like ketamine. Let's just say that.
Well, if you see, people have charted out like when he actually sends his tweets, right? You've seen that graph, and there's never more than a few hours where he isn't posting, and it's not always the same hours. So he's sleeping 2 to 4, maybe 5 hours a night at different times, different days. It's not good for you. It's just it's really not your state of mind, your awareness. Like, there's only so many amphetamines you can take before your brain is a scrambled mess.
And that's just it, right? Like, we actually don't know what drugs he's on. We don't know a lot about the actual internal Musk stuff, right? Like,
right.
We know a lot of theater. We know what looks a lot like kayfabe from the administration, and we also know that like both Musk and the administration love that shit. They love the appearance of a fight or these little intrigues and all these different things. And I am of the belief that Trump now is stuck with Musk. And I say that in the sense that like Musk is too important as a foil for the administration eventually when those numbers do start happening, right? When there are moments, they can always be like, well, look, it wasn't us. We've been trying to rein Musk in. We're doing these things. We didn't know it was this bad. And, Musk is the perfect then place to be able to say, look, like, we didn't know. They'll never get rid of him. I don't believe they will. I think there's too much now tied up between the inertia of the destruction of government, Musk, and the administration. And Musk is the guy you bring in to light your company on fire so you can collect insurance later. And that also means, though, he knows the bodies are out there. And he also knows that if there was any kind of malfeasance anywhere in there that he was a part of, that's a risk. And Musk is the perfect 21st century authoritarian because he, like the Republican Party now, literally just is in it for the power. They're not going to
Mm-hmm.
stop that just because the numbers are bad. What they'll do is they'll stop the numbers and they'll stop your ability to know that it's bad, right? Like if we know
Mm-hmm.
anything from authoritarian movements of this kind, especially ones that have now initiated the demolition of the government, you can't stop. If you stop, everything comes apart for you. You either
Right.
succeed at your goal and then take the power you need to stifle everything else, or you fail and stuff that you can't abide as that authoritarian will happen to you.
And one more
And
thing I should point out here.
yeah,
The reason why Musk is getting away with as much as he has is because he's been pretty smart about spreading the money around.
yes,
Wendy
yep,
Siegelman, great journalist, great reporter, is out now with a story saying that, building on the Wall Street Journal's reporting on this, that they were Musk apparently gave $50 million to Stephen Miller's nonprofit Citizens for Sanity before the
yep,
2022 midterms. And
exactly.
she reported also that the nonprofit spent $90 million on media contractors, and Katie Miller worked with one of those media contractors who helped run Musk's America PAC. So there's a lot of money
Yep,
flowing from Elon Musk to various administration players who aren't going to be terribly inclined to get rid of this guy, because what's the last thing Steve Bannon did for Stephen Miller? I mean, Bannon
exactly.
may not like the fact that he's there, but Bannon doesn't have the wallet in order to keep up with this. And I think that
No,
that's my biggest
his
question is like, is Musk just spending entirely too much of his own money for any of these people to be able to get rid of him? Has he bought his way in to the point
I
where
mean,
he's indispensable now?
that's how state capture works, right? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
how this kind of thing works, right? Like when you have a billionaire who's worth in the ballpark of $500 billion, depending on how his stocks keep doing, basically saying, I'll be the piggy bank for your worst desires. And I won't ask
Yeah.
questions. In fact, I agree with you. That's really tough to kick, right? Especially when his support, in all seriousness, and like his monetary support, not just his vocal support, probably won them the election, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the tough one. Like,
So I think you're both raising very valid points, and the money is a big part of it because where else are they going to get it from?
Mm-hmm.
But I think the numbers are going to come in, and it's going to start really damaging Trump. And it's just so very obvious to remove the guy who's there with him in all the interviews, who's taking all the same questions, who's sitting down with Sean Hannity, who's at the cabinet meetings and getting to speak more than anyone else. I think there's an ego issue that's going to arise where they're going to ask Musk to stop having such a central role. Maybe you can't get rid of him in the sense that we're done with him, we don't want anything to do with you, go away. But maybe it's you take a back seat for a little while. Maybe let's your approval rating is in the teens.
Yeah.
And Trump has this built-in support of 30 to 35%. Let's ride that and get through this, and things will get better. So I think they will at some point, if the numbers get bad enough, they are going to try to pin it on Musk, and they are going to try to tell Musk to just take it, and nothing is going to change, and you're really still going to be as involved as you want to be, but it's going to be different. Because I think I think there is going to be a split there, and I'm not sure that Elon's going to be able to take that. I'm not sure that he's willing to back away at all in any sort of way. I think the way that things are now is how he wants it to be for the next 4 years. And I think the public pressure, I think the poll numbers, I think the economy, all of that is going to be laid on him. And eventually, if Trump does nothing, if Trump just says, well, this is just how it is, then it is going to start to affect him to the point that he can't govern. I mean, if they don't have enough support, if they don't have enough people behind what they're doing, they can't consolidate all the power. They can't capture everything.
Right.
They can try. Go ahead.
I have 2 points on this. One, I would ask, do numbers really matter when they are going to pass a bill that will disenfranchise 65 million women from voting? And do numbers matter if you can put the guns on the street? Trump can do both. I don't think numbers matter. I don't think they are thinking about elections because I don't think they believe that there are going to be any. I think we're all playing a game that's based on a system that no longer exists, and they know it, and they are running the Karl Schmidt. Everyone's going to be in chaos while we deconstruct the state. And once they figure it out, it won't matter because that's what they've said it, right? Like they've all.
I think that's where they're going, but I think that's for 8 years. I just don't think they've had enough time. I really
The
don't.
Nazis took out the Weimar democracy in 56 days. We're a day.
Well, the Weimar
50 or
democracy
something.
was in a lot worse shape than the United States was when they did that, but that's a
Was
valid
it?
point.
Was it? We've been in 20 years of free fall. We didn't have core institutional checks and balances in place that were when Bush was in office because Bush took them out. I really
I don't think we're in the money and wheelbarrows to get a loaf of bread.
You don't need that though. If you can't buy a house, look at our housing numbers right now. The housing default.
I mean, it's bad. We agree that it's bad.
The housing default numbers right now for mortgage defaults are higher than at the highest point in 2008.
But Orban took at least 10 years to get here. Putin took 15. I mean, if you're going to go off when the Weimar went down, that's one thing. But if you're going to start at the beer hall putsch, that's more than a decade.
The beer hall putsch was the Tea Party.
That's certainly one way of looking at it. I don't.
Citizens United was the push, right? Like, if we really want to get into it, this has been going on for 20 years. 10, 15 years ago is when they kicked the doors in and said corporations are people, and then led to the next step, which is now that people like Musk can buy an election. And we can see the wholesale destruction of key elements of the governmental system that were underpinning democracy. And also, you have the thing that happened in the late 90s, which I could say even was a proto-putsch, which was the deregulation of all media and allowed people like Murdoch to buy up things like Fox News, their newspapers, and then create the environment today. This isn't new. This is the of 30 years.
And I'm with you that it's all a step-by-step process, and certainly Citizens United was the reason that Musk was able to essentially buy a candidate for, to him, nothing. But you've already got a situation where Republicans are refusing to have town halls because they don't want to hear from their constituents.
Yes.
And I think it's bad. I think we agree on where they're going. I just think people still have opinions and still are going to demand some kind of results, demand to be heard, demand that they can keep their Medicaid, they can pay their hospital bills, that they can live. And I don't think Republicans have done enough where they can just ignore all of that. And that if the numbers if they hit us into a recession, if they cut Medicaid, if they go through these tax cuts, if they do all of these things, I think the people still get a vote. And I think either Trump or Musk is going to have to take the blame. And I'm not saying you can easily get rid of either one of them, but I think another option is President J.D. Vance with Trump pushed aside. And there may come a point when some people are going to have to choose do you want President Vance Musk or do you want President Trump? And you see it as happening so quickly, and I just don't think they're there yet.
It's a culmination of 40 years of work.
Let me ask you both this question then. Because Jay, you're making a very, very valid point here when you say that the economic numbers are going to come in, it's going to be terrible. it's going to
Yeah.
be an absolute bloodbath. We're already starting to see captains of industry being quoted in the Wall Street Journal saying things like, well, it's really not good. And we're seeing numbers that are just not good. And
what did you, and I just want to tell them, what the fuck did you think was going to happen?
What the fuck, man?
Like, you idiots. Why did you support this? You idiots. Sorry, please continue.
My question being, these numbers are going to come in. There's going to be a lot of widespread anger, and there's going to be that moment where the administration's going to have to decide how to deal with this. Do they try to placate the people by trying to make a move, like getting rid of an Elon or getting rid of, somebody who can be that fall guy? Or, to Karl's point, do they decide it's tanks in the street time? Fuck them. We're going to do it this way, because I think that's what's going to happen. We're going to come to a point where we're going to have a crisis. Something big is going to break. And then what?
That's the problem, right? Like, we're just at a point, and I am of the belief, just looking at a whole host of historical points and like the way that our military and things work. Let me be very clear. They can't hold this country for a damn thing. If they want to put boots on the ground, they're not holding this country. Nope. They're doing more damage to themselves, ultimately, right? But the thing is, like, I think you run into a wall here of, well, we actually can't do anything to change this because we've directly caused it, right? With the economic stuff, all of this. And if you have a base that's starting to get real upset, like we're seeing, right? And where they are canceling their town halls, where they are saying, basically, stuff it. We're going to call secret police on you for fact checking us live, like we've now seen in a couple places.
Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, stand up.
Yep. And we're starting to see, though, that on the ground realities may be very different from what they have thought through, right? And like, if they believe, I think it's if they believe they can do the thing, they're going to do the thing. If they think that there's some risk that it destabilizes so fully that they can't, I don't know what they do, right? And I think the goal for Trump and them is they want the disorder. They want the chaos. They want these things because they think it helps them ultimately consolidate. But, at some point, regardless of if it's intentional on their part or not, the chaos consumes you. And
let's talk about that for a second, the chaos, because, like, to Jay's point, he thinks we're not there yet, and he's probably to some extent correct, because while the literal black shirts came for that woman in Idaho at the school board meeting and dragged her out in a scene like right out of The Handmaid's Tale at that point, the next day, the chief of police in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which is not exactly a liberal utopia, as the stories have been putting out lately, had a story saying that these guys were in a private security company. They were in 16 different violations of the law here. Their license had been suspended, and that they would be dropping charges against the woman and considering pressing charges against the guys who did it.
Right.
And this is the same police chief that, when Patriot Front showed up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho to start shit at their Pride in the Park festival, decided to detain them all, haul them out of the U-Haul, unmask every single one of these guys, and let guys like Dave Nywork come along and take pictures of every single one of them, putting the boot to the narrative that these guys are all feds.
Right.
So there are still, even in the worst places, even in the places that you don't want to be right now, individuals who are in positions of power to say, no, this is wrong. And I don't think that guy's a flaming liberal, but I think that guy probably still believes in the rule of law up to some point and doesn't want this to happen in his city. Now, when guys like him end up getting black bag, that's when I'm really going to be afraid of where this is all going.
Well, and I actually don't think we get to that point, right? Because I think you've made a really good point here, and it goes to Jay's point, and I think it goes to like, there's no monolith in this country outside of white power right now, right? Like, white power in this country, they want to project their monolith. They're not actually, they're projecting it, right? But the reality is there are people everywhere. And I've said this online so many times, and I will say it here today. Everywhere in this country has good people fighting for the thing that we all believe in, which is rule of law and democracy. that will continue even if Trump does decide to do we're going to do, we're going to do this thing at the barrel of a gun. And what I think their goal is, right, and we've seen it throughout government, is remove those people like that sheriff, right? And people who will say, look, I don't necessarily agree on the politics with the person who is saying it, but my God, that's illegal.
Yeah.
and that's the thing, right? So like it's all gonna come down to personal choices by individuals throughout government and society, whether or not this thing does go to the numbers are so bad that we have to act, or the numbers are so bad we're gonna, start kicking this thing into the next gear. And that's been, I think, the toughest part for a lot of us in the, outside of what we all do, is that there's an appearance of monolith for some of this, right? Whether it's the population, whether it's a political group, whether it's a governmental entity, and everyone has agency. So it's all just, at the end of the day, it's going to be a choice. Do we want to kick this pig into rolling tanks, or do we want to take our hits and hope that things stabilize just enough for us to get to a point where we could kick tanks into the streets? I frankly think they've destabilized enough that at some point something load bearing is going to give, and they just don't know how to respond to systemic collapse, right? And so that's more my concern, frankly, than like immediate Nazis in the streets with guns. It's more like, well, this whole section of the country doesn't have power, and the people organizing to do stuff because the Democrats can't and the Republicans won't are white nationalist and neo-Nazi groups. And like there's so many problems here where it's just interconnected, spiraling out of systems. That's the concern. And the fight between Musk and Trump, if it comes at all, in my mind, it is when it becomes so clear that things have deteriorated on the ground past a point that we can really function, that Trump is going to have to scapegoat him, right? Like that's the one time for me that it seems more apparent, is literally like flaming wreckage on the ground in the country time, right? Where it's just like, if we don't do this, they're going to come for us, right? That's the moment I actually see them getting towards Musk, is if things get so bad that they are mulling over something like the Insurrection Act. Because if the Insurrection Act doesn't work, because you can't hold this country, sorry, U.S. military people, you don't have enough troops, guns, or people.
Well, and I think most of the military folks in the brass are smart enough not to try.
I think that's true too. And I think that's the other part, right? Like if Trump gets wind that the military is going to say fuck you when he says go into the country, they're going to have to make decisions then, right? A guy like Musk becomes much more expendable when the military is saying, you do this, we're going to depose you. And we'll see. It's all just free for all right now. I don't think they can get rid of Musk. I don't think they want to right now. But I think if it ever comes to that point, things on the ground will be so out of control that they will be forced to make a decision between dump Musk or drop the mask completely. I think they don't have much option.
Well, if they do decide to get rid of Musk or try to push him aside, and I think we all agree he's not going to go quietly if that day ever comes. They will start leaking stories about him, about his behavior, about his mental state, about his mental capacity, about why he's doing this, stuff about his beliefs. You're going to start seeing stories about, yes, he knew it was a Nazi salute, and here's why he did it. And then they're going to start talking more about his family's, leak the videos, leak the private chats. It won't happen in a day. It will be a slow, coordinated push. And maybe if he is unpopular enough and it's enough time has passed and they've gathered enough material, which you can be sure that they are gathering that material.
Oh yes.
And I'm not sure how aware Elon is of anything to rein anything in, to control himself. I think he's lost all inhibitions. But what I will say, and I know that Karl, you think this threat is closer than anyone else realizes, and the point of no return. If we haven't reached it, we're very close. I mean, what you're saying about the military and what you're saying about how the government functions. Trump's first term, right? He put a bunch of unqualified toadies, just people who had no business being in the jobs that they had. And they got the jobs because they said nice things about Trump. And now we have different but similar people who, yes, they're loyal and yes, they say nice things about him. But these hires, Kash Patel, RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, these are people there to dismantle things. These are people there who have been put in place to make that shift from the United States, leader of the free world, liberal democracies. They are there to shift us toward authoritarianism, towards Putinism, towards what the Chinese government is doing to their own people in terms of surveillance, in terms of centralized rule. And I think, look, we're still going to have midterm elections. Republicans have a very slim majority right now. They barely got this horrible funding bill passed. I think we agree that future elections are going to be less free and less fair, and that trend is going to continue. And we cannot count on elections to save us because Republicans might just ignore the results. Right. But I think for me, it is. I'm more concerned about the long term, about Pete Hegseth being in there and Trump firing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs because he's black, right, and the efforts to resegregate. And I think that, where we're headed, I think it's going to take more time. But I think if they pull this off, and maybe it is through enough kayfabe and social media conspiracy theories and just distractions to just get them over the finish line, we will eventually reach that point. But I think it's going to take months, years. I think the time to act is now. I think we still have time. I don't know how much.
I agree with that. I think we still have time. I think there's still avenues that are open to us. We haven't hit any of the brick walls that we can't move past. But I think the reality is that time is quickly shortening, right? And what we've seen with certain authoritarian stuff, whether it's a country like Russia or even Orban, that time period changes based on a lot of things, right? And for the US, we've been in a pseudo-authoritarian thing since Trump came down the first time, right? And the Democrats won, and God bless them for doing it, and Biden won, and that slowed it down. But I think this is a systems problem now, right? The damage they've done to systems compounds just as it does intellectually when their misinformation starts to do what it's done in the last 5 years, which is really eat itself and recreate new. And, I think with Musk specifically, and I was thinking about it while we were talking, they have to have Twitter for them to project the thing that they're doing as normal, legitimate, and not the thing it is. That's the real power here. The money's important. Musk being a great foil is there as an avenue. The thing with Twitter, though, is where this is, because this is a digital autocracy, for lack of a better word, on Musk's part. It's a digital autocracy. And so, they have to have that to keep messaging this narrow, right? And, I just don't know how the party can lose that and still do what they need to do both here and internationally, because I think what people have forgotten with Musk and Twitter is he's running Twitter in a model that looks a lot like the kleptocratic regimes of Europe, where it's, if you pay me more, I will let you do whatever you want. But if you're just a user, just a citizen, quote unquote, you are fully at the whims of what I think should go, and you actually have no say in what happens here. And it's interesting because that is kind of the model, right, for the technocracy thing that Musk is coming from through his family, and the technocratic movement that that members of his family were from. So it's very interesting, kind of in my head, trying to work those two things together, because in a lot of
Well,
ways, the Republican Party and what Musk are opposite beings historically.
We're never going to see any of those negative stories that they want to spread
No.
about Musk on Twitter. He's not going to
No.
let it happen. He's already proven that. The minute you say anything bad about him, regardless of what part of MAGA you're in, your account is just hosed.
Yeah.
He's done it to Loomer. He's done
Well,
it to
here's
any number of these people.
The reality of them, MAGA Trump, trying to push Musk aside and him not being on board with it, not going along, is it's going to create a state of chaos that we can't really predict, because you're right. They do need Twitter. Republicans, Trump, they do need Twitter. Yep. That's why they have a head of news at X going to the White House briefings, because they're pretending like this is real and normal and not just some crazy fantasy world that they've created for themselves with a bunch of paid blue checks.
Yeah.
So yes, if they try to push Musk aside and he aims Twitter and the volley and volume of shit at Trump, it could very easily destroy him.
Oh yeah.
So it may come to a point where if Musk has to go, Musk has to be completely destroyed.
Right. Well,
I mean that may happen.
Yeah.
And because there is no other option.
No, and I think that's my point, right? Like in some ways is more just like, we have a problem now where some of these things, whether it's Musk or whatever, the only way out is by completely neutralizing the problem. And this country, we do things very well sometimes, but one thing we don't do in certain cases is see things through to the end in the way that they need to be, because it is hard, right? And like, we as a population want to see it through generally, but the government or entities around it don't always. And that's just a virtue of living in a democracy, right? Like sometimes that doesn't happen. In this case, though, the only way this ends, whether we take, the Republicans lose in 26, a huge number of seats, and those elections are duly, yes, these are real elections, and
which big question.
And these are questions. If that happens and we somehow take back the House and Senate, the avenues for them to do what they want become much slimmer, but the chance for true chaos and scary stuff goes up, right? Like this is the problem. Again, like we just don't know where any of this lands. There's no good way to say, this is a MAGA civil war where Bannon and Musk are going to go at each other's throats, and that this is all this and that. We just don't know right now. I hope you're right. I hope that we do see a point where it's not just an inflection point against Musk, but it's a true turn. The public already fucking hates the guy, but a governmental turn, where they do say, fine, we're going to slam you into the wall a couple times now. I hope they do that. I think it would be good if the Republican Party and the techno-fascists beat each other to death. I think that'd be great for all of us. We would all be in a better place if that's what happens. There's just, power does weirder things than money when we're dealing with people who like this. So I don't think any of us really know. And there, like I said earlier about just the general authoritarian, that people have agency and people make decisions based on their own calculus outside of party, outside of like true belief. They do things because they're human, right? And so that's what saves us ultimately from any of this is agency.
The weird thing that we have right now is we have all of these people scheming and all the palace intrigue and the various factions and this and that. We don't know where anyone really stands. We don't know where the loyalties really lie. They all think they're playing the other side, and the people they think they're playing are playing them right back. And everybody thinks they have the upper hand. I mean, this is not a functional
No.
government or way of
No.
doing things, but this is spy on spy. And you're right. We don't know where it goes. We don't know who really is going to be loyal to anyone else at any point, and it will probably change, and maybe it already has changed. Yeah, this is governing through fear and chaos.
It's the
where we are.
It's the traditional authoritarian bullshit too, where it's all just personal, petty infighting and shit throwing and people vying for positions of power against each other within the government. I mean, it's the class stuff, right?
And then at the end, they say, "Oh, I knew it. I knew this was going to happen all along. It was me. I masterminded
Exactly.
it."
Or they do the other one, which historically we've seen the other one too, which is I had no idea. I had nothing to do with it, and I was just following orders. Yeah, literally. Like,
well, we all saw Marco Rubio in the Oval, and that's definitely going to be his stance.
So
I remember when Marco Rubio was thought of as a hawk on these issues, and man,
about the same time that I remember seeing great anti-pot PSAs where there was a lady melted into a couch flat from smoking weed, and Marco was channeling that. In that meeting, that man, if he could have lost more spine, he would have become couch. He was so deep in his seat, and you can just see it, right? Like in some of these guys, like Rubio, right, who did sell their soul to get in. You can start to see this thing in their eyes where it's like, oh, well, I've killed myself, and it's going to take some time. I just didn't realize it when I did it. Shit. Like this is this is political polonium for some of these guys, right? Like they drank the tea.
Yeah. And there's nothing he can do. I mean, like you see the realization on his face, and he knows that he either sits there and he takes it, or he can leave.
Yep.
But if he wants any power, any relevance, if he wants people to have to pretend to like him, like he has to just go along with this. And it has moved beyond so many people. And all of these Republicans who, when they were still giving town halls and people asked him, "Why are you letting Elon Musk do this?" And they said, "Well, I can't do anything." Like, yeah, okay. You bought a ticket.
Yeah.
Here's the ride.
Oh, here's your Trump train. Are you enjoying the car? Like, you're not in control, right? And like, I don't know. It's very interesting. Really see that part, right? Because like in Trump 16, you could see a lot of souls dying, right? Like you could see a lot of hollow behind the eyes start to show up, and you could start to see
Ted Cruz on the phone line for Trump.
Exactly. Yeah. And you could see a lot of like I just hurt my soul. This time it's like, well, I didn't just hurt my soul. I think I might have just, done the whole thing. And like that's really interesting because that goes to my agency argument, right? Ultimately, Musk coming against Trump, any of this, it's gonna be people literally having a moment and just being like, what the fuck has happened? What have we done, right? And even like Hitler's generals, some of them tried to blow him up, right? It happens. Agency happens. People make decisions based on their own calculus. We may not like it. We may not think they're good people, but they do make decisions out of their own interests. And in a government where everyone's self-interest is for their own, all bets are off now, right? Because we're seeing that like even Musk, there are edges where we can see that he doesn't go past. And we're going to probably start to see all of this. We're going to start to see more. And the big thing for any of this, whether they can complete the consolidation, whether they put boots on the ground, whether we see people stand up and say, no, this is horrible, really comes down to if there is if something happens in the next 6 months, let's say, like a pandemic, some truly outlier event where we have to have functioning government plus like a functioning capacity to communicate plus the functioning capacity to get the logistics of that working between government, corporate, private, and individual, that's where they're going to run into real problems because they don't have that capacity. They've gutted it. And what for them, ultimately the pandemic hurt them so badly that probably in part is what led to them losing in 20. in part.
In part.
But if, COVID, I wear a mask every day. I've not stopped in 5 years. So let me say this is not a flip take. COVID was not as bad as what bird flu potentially is. If they can't control COVID and they're not going to deal with something like bird flu, they're going to lose control. And it ultimately won't matter what they do because the entropy of that kind of chaos consumes your administration and your ability to do the governance outside of that that's needed to do anything. And that's, I think that's the thing. Like, at this point, we have a real chance that it's just kind of chaotic and bad. And like, they're going to go after Social Security, right? Some of this, though, may be derailed purely because something may come out of the blue and punch them in the head. And that is tough because, like, that also means a whole lot of people are going to be negatively affected and many people are going to be hurt. And this country wasn't designed to be autonomous. As much as we rely on toxic individualism and a vision of frontier America where we were all kind of on our own and like fighting through the wilderness to claim, our destiny, that's just not how we work. And this government wants it. What do you do?
And they're going to find out real quick that we are not set up for that. I mean, to your point, we started gutting the safety net a long time ago. We started expecting to be able to let go first responders, let go mental health crisis workers. And we expect cops to do all of that now. And we're seeing the results of what happens when you do that. And as a result, now we're not set up for any kind of a like rugged individualism while you're even more on your own. It's going to lead to warlords. It's going to lead to cities that are just ungovernable. And I think we're coming to that. We're coming to that point where something big is going to break. You can't fuck around this much and not end up finding out on some level.
Yeah.
Because
and that's
they've
my
got the
view.
Doge kids in any number of databases, in any number of fucking personal information lists. Something is going to give. And it's not going to be too much longer before it does. And that becomes where all of these bets get payable. All of these questions get answered about what is going to happen when they hit that wall.
And the finger pointing is going to start, and then the intrigue is going to, and the leaks are going to start, and the firing squad is just, they're going to go round and round and round, and where we end up, who the hell knows?
And that's really the danger, I think, in a lot of ways, outside of even just like the worst case scenario, like right-wing death squads, is literally just chaos, right? Like, because all of these other things exist in chaos. And I think, as someone who lived in Minneapolis in 2020, ungovernability is one thing. Ungovernability coupled with right-wingers coming in to try and stoke it is another. And we do not have a good way in this country of dealing with deviation outside of certain standards because we've never had to. And that's, again, agency. I might be my word of the day. Like, groups have agency too, right? And like, that's where we're going to see a whole bunch of stuff. We're going to see blue states make decisions we've never seen before, probably based on some of this. We're going to see individuals do the same. And I think out of the chaos, if we hold our resolve as a population and really hold our belief in the idea of rule of law, a pluralist democracy that represents a multi-racial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-gender view of the world, regardless of how bad it gets, we have a chance to build something that actually represents the ideals that we believe from the documents that incorporated our country 100, 200 plus years ago, and run with it. Because that opposition that Trump and Musk and these people represent won't have just lost. They'll have lost the ability to say, look, we're the shiny new thing. And that we have the power to make your life simpler. Because at the end of the day, it's whoever has in a coup, right? The group that wins the coup is the one that makes it easier for you to get on with your day-to-day life. And at this point, that's not the federal fucking government anymore. It's going to be people on the ground doing things like organizing food banks. It's going to be people working with city and state legislatures to protect at-risk groups that are coming in from states where it's not safe. It's going to look like that. And that functions without a federal government. Those are choices based on people doing things they see they need to do.
Listen, folks, it's a class war, and there is one group that is destroying the social safety net and cutting Medicaid.
It's not me saying it this time. Hey.
No war but the class war.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know they got you looking in 50 different directions, but one side has the richest man in the world gutting the things that are going to help you.
Yeah.
And on the other side, there is a potential for an opposition and an opposition party, and we're going to work on that.
Yeah. Well,
but look,
choose wisely.
Yeah, choose wisely. Which choice do you want?
Yeah.
That's all it comes down to is which way do you want to go, Western man?
Which
do you
way,
follow
American?
The billionaire who is eating ketamine, snorting ketamine like it's or do you want to follow a broad coalition of people who may not know each other but want the best for all of us? Because one side wants you dead, one side wants you fed. Make a decision.